What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today is the official release of Mock Draft 1.0 on the channel. I do have a couple of 2024 mock drafts out on my channel. We did a mid-season one, we did a way too early one, but this is the first official mock draft 1.0 here for the 2024 NFL Draft. I am super excited for this. Last night, as I'm recording this, was the end of the football season with the Kansas City Chiefs defeating the San Francisco 49ers in one of the best Super Bowls, in my opinion. It was a really intense game once that second half came out, especially in that fourth quarter, right? You felt how high the stakes were, and everyone was just on their top game. So, super great Super Bowl is what I'm saying, but now all of our attention is towards April, the NFL Draft, and it starts right here. So, we're going to be doing an entire first round mock draft. This year has 32 picks this time because no one was tampering with Tom Brady. So, starting off here with the Chicago Bears, let's go with Caleb Williams here out of USC. And I feel like that's going to be kind of what the consensus pick is, and it has been for the longest time. Now, a lot can change from now until April, but from what it sounds like, the Bears are going to go with a quarterback, and it most likely will be Caleb Williams. But you know, if anyone is still on that Justin Fields train, I hate to break it to you, it doesn't look good for his odds, but you never know. Again, like I said, still so much time until the draft actually is on its way. Okay, now for the Washington Commanders. This is another team that desperately needs a quarterback. The Sam Howell experiment, in my opinion, is over. It was a good attempt at a guy who could potentially have been their Brock Purdy, but that has certainly not been the case. So, we're going to go with the quarterback here. Now, my second favorite quarterback in this year's draft class is Jayden Daniels out of LSU. However, I have heard a lot of great things about Drake May as well, just in the NFL draft community as well. So we'll switch it up. We are going to go with Drake May here out of North Carolina. Has a very big stature, good build, similar to Justin Herbert. That is a comparison that you're going to see thrown around a lot, and for good reason. Absolute cannon of an arm, right? And has kind of similar measurables in terms of height and weight as well. The thing about Drake May that people admire a bit more is his ability to use his legs. Not to say that Justin Herbert is not athletic or cannot use his legs, but Drake May will use it more than Justin Herbert does, and so that kind of just adds a second dynamic to his game as well that makes him a very intriguing prospect, but very accurate with the football. Drake May will be a top 3 pick in this year's draft class. Now, another team who desperately needs a quarterback. A report recently came out that Mac Jones is not the quarterback of the Patriots anymore, and so it would really surprise me if this team went in the direction of a Marvin Harrison or anywhere else besides the quarterback position, despite how many quarterbacks are in this draft class, right? I mean, we have this first tier with Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jayden Daniels, and then the second tier here with Bo Nix, Michael Penix, and JJ McCarthy. It would surprise me if this team decided to take a dip into that second tier of quarterbacks heading into this draft when you have the opportunity at taking one of the 3 guys in the first tier. Now, maybe they don't like a guy like Jayden Daniels, and that's why they choose to go in an opposite direction. But for me personally, I can't set my bias aside, and I think that they should take Jayden Daniels here. Phenomenal prospect. People are comparing him to Lamar Jackson because of his athleticism, because of his speed, and I think that that is a very fair comparison. There aren't many athletes like these two. When you have Jayden Daniels out in open space, it is hard to catch up to him. Now, the thing with Jayden Daniels is you don't want to see him take as many vicious hits as he has been in college. You definitely want to see him protect himself, as that has been an issue for Lamar Jackson in the NFL as well. But the difference between these two guys, and the reason why Jayden Daniels is potentially a top 3 pick while Lamar was a late first round guy in his respective draft, is Jayden Daniels can really sling the football. I mean, he's got an arm. He's got the accuracy, and the one trait that stands out to me the most, right, is his ability to throw under pressure. There were many times where he was getting hit square in the jaw from a defender, a big defensive tackle, and he just let it sling with tremendous accuracy deep down the football field. I love Jayden Daniels. I mean, this is a phenomenal prospect. So, Jayden Daniels, one of my favorite quarterbacks, one of my favorite players in this entire draft. And I think it would be a mistake if the Patriots decided to trade this pick back or go in a different direction like they have been rumored to. But I respect them exploring other options regardless. Now, to me, this is a no-brainer pick. For the Cardinals, you just take the best player available. There are so many holes on this team. We are going to go with Marvin Harrison Jr. He is most certainly going to live up to the hype. Now, there was a report that came out that some NFL scouts are actually higher on Malik Nabers in comparison to Marvin Harrison. I don't know if that's smoke. I don't know if that's all bluff. But Marvin Harrison, I mean, this is a lengthy human being, right? 6'4", 215. He's got the catch radius as good as anyone else. Can high point the football. Is tremendous after the catch. Plays very physically. Has a ton of agility. Has breakaway speed. This is a complete wide receiver if you've ever seen one, and for a position that is turning into one of the most valuable in the entire league. If you can get a top caliber player at the spot, I mean, you have to go out and get him if you can. So this would instantly be Arizona's number one wide receiver and would definitely take Kyler Murray's game to the next level. Now, this is an interesting one. Number 5 here with the Los Angeles Chargers. It's interesting because wide receiver is still a need, and they just drafted Quentin Johnson last year, which isn't looking so great, but there is still a lot of time for him to improve and develop. You still have Keenan Allen, you still have Mike Williams. I just don't know if wide receiver is the smartest decision to go here, just because you do have some name value there, and you did invest a first-round pick in the position last year as well. And so I'm going to refrain from going wide receiver at the moment, and we are going to go with one of the best prospects in this draft in Brock Bowers. Now, this could be a little controversial just because it's not typical to see a tight end go this high. I mean, we did have Kyle Pitts go this high, and it takes a very talented player to do so. So, I mean, really, the only controversy is coming from positional value. However, I do think Brock Bowers is more talented than Kyle Pitts. He's 230 pounds, which is a slight concern to me. I think the ideal weight for a tight end is around 250 pounds because you still want them to have that ability to block extremely well. They might have to take on edge defenders from time to time, but when you watch film, Brock Bowers is a proficient blocker and is a complete mismatch in the passing game. I mean, that is undeniable, but if you watch him in the run blocking situations, doesn't seem to struggle with that. And this is a position in John Harbaugh's offense that is going to be heavily utilized. I mean, you go back to his time in San Francisco with Vernon Davis. He got a lot of targets during that span of time. And then also during his time at Michigan has really, really utilized that tight end position. So I would expect the same here as he transitions back into the NFL with Justin Herbert. They're going to want to give him more targets to throw to. And Brock Bowers would certainly elevate not just the passing game for Herbert up the middle, but also would be an effective blocker in the run game as well, which we know that John Harbaugh wants. John Harbaugh wants to go after really well. I could be getting this wrong. Jim Harbaugh, you know who I'm talking about. Okay. Pick number 6. We are going to go here with the New York Giants here, and we are going to go with Malik Nabers out of LSU. Now, Nabers is a very, very good route runner, and the thing that's going to stand out to you when you watch him on film is his ability to get separation. Now, he is only 180 pounds, and so that could scare some teams away just because of questions about how he's going to perform against the press coverage. Not the press and his interviews, but press coverage at the line of scrimmage. But fantastic after the catch, right? And you take a look at his efficiency from every level of the field, and he can do it all, right? A deep threat. And again, that ability to create separation has been a huge part of his success. And then also, like I said, his run after the catch in his intermediate to short routes just makes him a very lethal player on every level. I don't think, right, especially if the top 3 quarterbacks go, that the Giants are in a position right now to snag one of those quarterbacks. And so the least that they can do is get some weapons, because I feel like for the longest time they haven't had an elite caliber wide receiver. And so go out there, get Malik Nabers, and that changes the whole dynamic of that room, and he's immediately wide receiver 1 in my opinion. Now, moving on to the Tennessee Titans here, we're going to go with the number 1 offensive tackle prospect in this draft in Joe Alt. Joe Alt is a phenomenal prospect, right? His ability to get into the open field, make blocks into the second level. Sorry about that. And also just his ability to fill in gaps, just lock on to defenders. I mean, he is Mr. Consistency. We take a look at his stats over here because it is hard to judge offensive linemen sometimes just because there aren't a ton of stats that you can really base it off of, but only 1 sack, 2 hurries, 2 hits, on 713 snaps, which is absolutely phenomenal. Now, one thing I will say about Joe Alt that is a little concerning to me is he does tend to reach at times and put a lot of his body weight forward. And so, if he misses, that's where he can really get himself into trouble. But I mean, aside from that, I mean, this is a really smart guy, and you can tell he understands gap responsibilities, where the play is going to be going, when to seal blocks. I like Joe Alt. For me, this is the number one offensive tackle in the class, and I haven't really had to put that much thought into it after looking at multiple guys. I mean, this is a very, very sturdy offensive lineman, and one from a very reputable school. I know just because a guy comes from a school, that typically produces talent doesn't necessarily mean that they will be just as talented as the guys before them, but some teams, some schools are factories for certain positions, and Notre Dame is certainly one for offensive linemen. So I like Joe Alt's chances in the NFL. Here we have the Atlanta Falcons. Now, this is also a team you really could use a quarterback, but again, if that top three is not there, you just refrain and you just build up the rest of your team right here. And Rome Odunze would be a really interesting one because aside from Drake London, you don't really have another wide receiver after that, in my opinion. So we're going to go with the edge rusher, and we're going to go with Dallas Turner out of Alabama. Dallas Turner is one of the more aggressive defensive linemen in this draft. I mean, he is going to come at you with speed, power. He's going to just rip through offensive linemen. And he comes in with energy. He looks hungry each and every down. High motor player, and really took a huge step up this past season in terms of production. So you really saw him kind of just put everything together and just accelerate as a pass rusher. So I really, really like Dallas Turner. You can see I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan. I would love to have him on my team, but unfortunately, he goes here number 8 to the Atlanta Falcons in this mock draft. 21 years old, and again, just electric off the line of scrimmage. I just think that combination of speed and power, I think his hand technique is very good as well, and he doesn't waste movement, right? What I mean by that is, when he takes that first step off the line of scrimmage, off the snap, when he uses his hands, when he puts them into motion, there is not a lot of wasted movement. So I really like Dallas Turner in that aspect. And for a team that has been desperately looking for some edge rusher, outside linebacker help in that 3-4 defense for a long time, Atlanta is certainly going to love a guy like Dallas Turner who provides so much versatility off the edge. Now, speaking of Rome Odunze, he's going to go right here to the Chicago Bears. You pair him up right with Caleb Williams now. You also have DJ Moore. Odunze is one of the best jump ball receivers in the entire draft. He's going to go down the field. Chances are most times that 50-50 ball is going to be a 75-25 in favor of Odunze, and also does do a very decent job at creating separation. Now, the one thing that is going to keep him from not getting drafted above guys like Harrison and Malik Neighbors, I think that his route running is good, but it's not as good as either of those guys, and so you don't typically see him get as much separation as these guys. I'm not saying he can't get separation at all, but we're talking about two very high caliber players in Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors, and that's not to say that Odunze isn't, because he really is. He could be a wide receiver 1 depending on which scenario he ends up with, but again, I know how much value there is put into guys who can run very sharp and crispy routes and really get that separation off of defenders. Odunze can certainly work on that. He certainly has the talent for it. But again, this is a prospect that still, I think, is top 10. And the fact that there is still a lot of room for improvement already as an extremely talented player, I think Rome Odunze is going to be fantastic in the league and probably the best wide receiver to ever come out of Washington. But you just look at these stats. I mean, he is first in the FBS in deep yards with 783. Like, he is the deep ball guy. I mean, Michael Penix would go to him time and time and again, and they would just connect over and over again. So you have a guy that can launch it down the field, and you need a big play in a hurry. Rome Odunze is certainly your guy, and that's why there's so much intrigue with this player. 140 targets last year, and he had 92 catches for 1,600 yards and 13 touchdowns. Certainly the breakout season. Okay, now, final pick of the top 10 right here. We're going to go with a tackle here. There is some speculation that they could go with a quarterback for what is a plan after Aaron Rodgers is gone, because he is getting up there in age. We are going to go with Olu Fashanu here. I know that there has been some talk about some of the other tackles in this class, especially after the Senior Bowl, and we will mention the Senior Bowl a couple of times later on in this video. But Olu Fashanu, very, very young player in terms of how long he's been playing football. He didn't pick up football until his junior year of high school. He was actually a basketball player before that, and then transitioned very late. So has only played, I want to say, 3 to 4 years of actual organized football between high school and college, right? Because he's declaring right now as a freshman, or sorry, as a junior coming out of Penn State. But Fashanu, right, you're going to bank on his upside. And for a team that desperately needs offensive line help right now, because you can't have another Aaron Rodgers situation again, you got to go out and get whoever you think is the best offensive lineman on the board. And that's exactly what the Jets do here with Olu Fashanu. He does have some games where, there are some hiccups, and you want to see him clean up in pass protection. But for the most part, you can really bring him in here. You can mold him into the player that you want because there is so much upside. He's a very talented player with, limited snaps. I think that this is a player that you can really work with and turn into a guy that you want to if you have the vision for it and if you believe he has the talent. So that is where that is the direction we're going to go with here for the New York Jets. Now, for my Minnesota Vikings, very tough selection when you take a look at the board. Just not a ton of needs that are filled with some of these players. I mean, you could go to Cooper DeJean, but do the Vikings want to go in the direction of a corner again? I'm not sure. There's still a lot of young guys on the team that they're kind of waiting to break out. And so quarterback would also be another one, because what is the situation with Kirk Cousins? Do you give him $45 million a year? Do you take one of these tier 2 quarterbacks here at number 11? The answer to all of that is no, 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 no. So I think you just go best player available here. And in my opinion, edge is going to be a huge need, especially if Danielle Hunter does not return in free agency. Go ahead here and take Laiatu Latu. He's going to be a scheme fit 3-4 outside linebacker here. 23 years old. Does have an injury history, which is slightly concerning for some teams. But when you take a look at the pass rushing arsenal that he has in his bag, Laiatu Latu is one of the most fearsome players in all of college football. I mean, this guy was disruptive week in and week out. And his pressure number, right? I mean, his win rate is absolutely insane. 26.2 pass rush win rate. He had 36 hurries, 11 hits, and 15 sacks. I mean, this is a phenomenal prospect. I understand, you might not know the name too well, right? Because you might know names like Dallas Turner, Jared Verse. You hear their name a lot more just because they were in college football playoff conversation a lot more. But Laiatu Latu, you can make the argument, was the best pass rusher in college football last year, and people would not call you crazy. I mean, his speed, his athleticism off the edge is hard to match in this entire draft class. And just because of those lingering injuries and, him being 23 years old, that's kind of what's going to hold him out of the top 10. But I wouldn't be surprised if a team who desperately needs an edge rusher will quickly turn in the card for Laiatu Latu just because of how efficient he is as a pass rusher. Very good run stopper as well, too. He's very good in terms of gap discipline and also just wrapping up tackles on a consistent basis as well. And also has 3 interceptions, which is Aiden Hutchinson, he has the ability to drop into coverage like many outside linebackers do. So I love Laiatu Latu here at pick number 11 for the Vikings. Now, this is where I really got stumped here in the draft, because likewise to the Vikings, the Broncos also need a quarterback now that they don't have Russell Wilson there anymore. And I don't think this is a team that is going to be willing to take one of those tier 2 quarterbacks here as well. I mean, it would just be too much of a reach at this point in time. And so this is a team that could potentially trade down in the draft to acquire more picks and potentially take one of those quarterbacks later on in the first round. I don't see it happening. And so, in terms of taking the quarterback, it is possible that they could trade down. I just don't see them taking the quarterback here. For this mock draft, we're going to stay put, keep the order as is. And what I'm going to do here is we're going to go cornerback, and this is the first cornerback off the board. I'm going to go with Kool-Aid McKinstry here. I know that a lot of people have Kool-Aid McKinstry a lot lower on their board, and I'm not quite sure why. I mean, this is a very athletic corner with a high level of production at Alabama, has been their number 1 cornerback for the longest time, and I know people are talking about his athleticism and his upside, but to me, those things are not in question, and I think he's going to answer any questions that people have about him at the combine. I think he's going to run well. I think he's going to be in between the range of 4.5, 4.6, and I think that's serviceable. He also has the ability to return punts, and I mean, you take a look at his numbers, right? And you have another guy in this class in Terrion Arnold who is getting a ton of hype now, even over Kool-Aid McKinstry. I mean, the numbers against him, right? You take a look, 19 receptions on 39 targets and only allowed 205 yards and 1 touchdown on the season. Like, teams are not throwing it to Kool-Aid McKinstry all that much, and they decided to go after Terrion Arnold. I just think that that's the respect that a lot of teams have for Kool-Aid McKinstry. They understand how talented he is. I think he's going to go a lot higher than people think. I mean, I've seen him go as low as 31 in some mock drafts, and I think that's just absurd to me. I mean, this is a very tech-savvy type of cornerback, right? He doesn't panic when the football is in the air. I think he does a great job in both man and zone coverage, maybe a little better in zone coverage, but I mean, this is a really, really good cornerback, and so I'm not sure what the deal is, but we're going to go with Kool-Aid McKinstry here. It's going to be very interesting to see the order that the cornerbacks go in because nothing is set in stone at that position, and I think you're going to see a handful of guys go in the first round, very similar to what we saw last year in the 2023 draft. Now, another team, very difficult to make a decision on. They have so many needs, and I just don't know which direction they're going to go in. Again, another team who is drafting in the middle of the draft, needs a quarterback. Do they take a tier 2 guy? The answer again is no. And we're going to go with BPA in this scenario, right? So I think that there are a couple of needs. I think offensive tackle is a big one, and I think cornerback is a big one. But I think the cornerback position is a little bit more talented as we take a look at the board. And so what we're going to do here is we are going to take Terrion Arnold, the counterpart to Kool-Aid McKinstry. Terrion Arnold, right, you're going to see his comparison be like Trevon Diggs just because of his ability to make some wild interceptions, make crazy breaks on the football, but his aggressiveness can also bite him sometimes as he does give up a ton of yardage, right? We take a look here. He gave up 441 yards. Now, I know Trevon gave up 1,000. Okay, that's dramatic, but he gave up he had 5 interceptions, gave up 41 catches, and then 441 yards. It's not like he's giving up a crazy amount of yards, but again, that aggressiveness is going to bite him sometimes, and so you live and die with it, right? And some teams want guys who can turn the football over and get the football and an extra possession to their football team, and that's exactly what ability Terrion Arnold has for that team. I think he would come into Las Vegas, be the number 1 cornerback, really give that defense the energy that they're looking for. Like, I think he matches the energy of like a Max Crosby, of an Antonio Pierce, who's the head coach now of the team. So I think that this would be a good pick if they are unable to go into the quarterback position. But this is another spot where if they do have an offensive tackle, an offensive lineman rated higher than one of these cornerbacks on the draft, I wouldn't be shocked if they go in that direction as well. But still very early on in the process, it's hard to decipher what the team's plan is, but we're going to just go Terrion Arnold for the time being at a position of need. Now here, for the New Orleans Saints, we're going to go tackle here. I mean, they tried to invest in that position, drafting Trevor Penning a couple years ago. He really hasn't panned out. And I think you've got to, if you want to see him play, I think guard might be a more realistic option. I mean, he's a huge guy, right? 6'7", 325. That's a relatively good size for a guard. Maybe you want to see him be a little bit shorter. But that 325, you could kick him inside if you want to involve him into your plans. I am about to sneeze. Like, I can feel it. Anyway, that's besides the point. Saints, you got to go out and get a tackle. I mean, you have Andres Pete, right, playing one of the spots, and Ramczyk was on IR for a little bit last year as well. And Pete was a guard for a long time, had tackle flexibility, but he played tackle last year, and it wasn't pretty. So you got to go out there and get a legit tackle because Trevor Penning really hasn't worked out. It's unfortunate. I think Drazon Newton could be another option, but you did get Brian Brzee last year, so I'm not as concerned about that position for the time being. Oh my goodness, my nose is absolutely killing me. Anyway, let's go ahead here and take Taliese Fuaga out of Oregon State. Dominant offensive tackle right here. You take a look at his stats. Did not give up a single sack last year for the Oregon State Beavers. Does have a high hurry number, high hit number, but this is a guy that has been getting a lot of buzz recently as well. So they need a tackle. You put him with Ramczyk. Hopefully it gives Derek Carr a little bit more time to settle down in the pocket. But now you have a legit tackle right there on either the left or the right side. And you don't have to have any, suspect player like Trevor Penning playing the spot or Andres Pete, a former guard, playing tackle. Just get a guy there who's natural at the position, and we move on from there. Now, the Indianapolis Colts, interesting. You take a look at their needs. Wide receiver, a need. Alec Pierce really hasn't broken out into that deep threat that they probably wanted him to. Josh Downs is almost strictly a slot wide receiver, from my understanding. That's where he plays his best ball. And then, maybe it's because Michael Pittman is going to be a free agent, and they don't know if they're going to sign him back. But I think they're going to bring Pittman back. I think both sides are on relatively good terms, and I think it's beneficial to both sides. So I don't really see wide receiver as the number one need for this team, but I do think DB is a huge need for this team, just because you don't really have like that number one corner on that football team, right? I mean, you do have Juju Brents, and he performed very well at Kansas State, and then also did very well in the combine, which really boosted up his draft stock. So I like Juju Brents. I think heading into year 2, I think he could be one of those sneaky good players that has a breakout season. But we need another cornerback, right? I mean, Kenny Moore's great. He is strictly a slot cornerback as well. A lot of good corners on the board. And what we're going to go ahead and do here is take Kenyon Mitchell out of Toledo. Okay, I mentioned how we're going to bring up the Senior Bowl later on this video. I mean, you want to talk about a guy who really boosted his stock at the Senior Bowl? It was Kenyon Mitchell out of Toledo. And an event like that is huge for a guy coming out of a small Division I school in the MAC, because a lot of people have questions like, how are you going to perform against the top talent in the country when you're not playing against the MAC? And I mean, he showed up every single day of that event. Just tremendous man-to-man coverage on one-on-ones. He does not panic when the football is in the air and does a great job of tracking as well. And the one thing that you're going to hear a lot with him is how fluid his movement is from his lower body. This is a great job. Also does a great job at the line of scrimmage as well. Kenyon Mitchell's getting a lot of hype, and understandably so. It's really hard to find film on him just because he comes from a very small school. But if you didn't know, had one monster game last season against NIU, Northern Illinois, 4 interceptions in one game. I mean, I don't care what level of football you're doing that at. That is absolutely ridiculous. So, I know stats only tell part of the story, but Kenyon Mitchell is a real corner technician, and I mean, his stock could continue to rise, especially if he has a good combine as well. Now here we move on to number 16 here with the Seattle Seahawks. We're going to go ahead here, and, they could go into the route of offensive linemen as well. I think there's one guy in Jackson Powers Johnson who's a serious candidate to go in the first round in terms of interior offensive linemen. But other than that, I'm not too sure. Do some of these tackles kick into guard? I'm not really sure. I don't feel super confident in saying like, oh yeah, that is, for sure the plan no matter where this guy goes for anyone. So I'm going to refrain from that for the time being, but also address another very significant need on this team. We're going to go with Jared Verse here out of Florida State. Ton of athleticism, a guy who you're going to hear a lot. You're going to hear people say, hey, still very raw at football. Now, why do they say that? Picked up football very late, almost like Olu Fashanu. Originally was committed to U of Albany, which is a Division I FCS school, and then transferred to Florida State, and then that's when he really got himself on the map. But a good 6'4", 260 pounds, plays with a ton of athleticism for his size, very explosive player, and he is primarily going to win with power. Jared Verse is a very intriguing prospect. I think is going to go near the middle of the draft here, but again, young player, very raw talent, someone that you're going to try and mold into what you want. And, despite this team being a 3-4 defense, and you typically don't see guys like this, go at these spots because of what the scheme fit looks like. I mean, they have a guy in Boye Mafe who's relatively big as well. And so I don't think that they're going to refrain from taking a player just because he doesn't necessarily fit the prototype for that spot. I mean, Jared Verse, I think because of his athleticism, you can put him in a lot of different spots. I think you could, find ways to put him at 3 tech, 5 tech a lot of the times there for the Seahawks. So, I mean, it's going to be a good pick regardless, whether he fits the scheme or not, in my opinion. Now, 17 here, we're going to go ahead, take another cornerback. There's going to be a huge run on cornerbacks. And what we're going to do here is take Nate Wiggins out of Clemson. High effort player, very good in man-to-man coverage, does a great job at the line of scrimmage in terms of jamming players considering his size at 180 pounds. Now for me, Nate Wiggins is not at the top of my board for cornerbacks just because of that weight. You saw a guy relatively small in Emmanuel Forbes last year really have a hard time. Now, I do think that Nate Wiggins is a better prospect than Emmanuel Forbes, but it does scare me because and this is just personal preference, like physical corners that can really affect the wide receiver at the line of scrimmage. And so I just don't know if Nate Wiggins is going to be able to do that. He's going to struggle against the bigger wide receivers like a Mike Evans, like a A.J. Brown. Those are just some examples. So I could be very wrong on this, right? But, again, I've heard so much about the cornerback position and, who's potentially going to go first. I don't think that there's a clear-cut number one this year, a consensus one at least in this class. It's going to be interesting to see where these guys go. But Jacksonville's defense really fell apart at the end of the year. They talk about still potentially needing pass rush. I think Trevon Walker ended the season extremely well, and I don't think enough people are giving him credit for it just because a lot of people took their eyes off the Jaguars once they started to get cold. But him and Josh Allen, I think, are a great duo if they can keep those two together because Josh Allen will be a free agent, but they really need to get that secondary together. I think Tyson Campbell is a great member of the secondary in that group. He is definitely cornerback one, but they definitely need to go out there and get another piece. And Nate Wiggins will be just that here at pick 17. Pick 18, we're going to go with an offensive tackle. Let's go with J.C. Latham out of Alabama. This dude is absolutely massive. Now on here, I believe it's going to say he's 340. Yeah, near 340 pounds, 6'6". On Alabama's website, it says that he's 360 pounds. That is a massive human being. You watch him on film, not the drippiest guy. Doesn't really have a ton of accessories. I'm not even sure that he wears gloves, to be honest with you. But he goes out there and he plays ball. This is a big human being. A guy that's going to move players, right? And it's hard to get off of him. He's got a lock on some guys. So, hey, maybe it's better that he doesn't wear gloves because when he's got his bare hands on someone, they ain't moving him. Now, the one thing about J.C. Latham is despite him being really big, it is common to see on film guys try and collapse the pocket because his legs, they're not to say that they're not super active because for his size he has great agility and horizontal movement, side to side, east to west movement, but you do see the pocket collapse at times. And so JC Latham is not one of my favorite guys, but considering the need that Cincinnati has had for the longest time at the offensive tackle spot, they have to take a guy like this. This dude is an absolute monster. So we're going to go with J.C. Latham there at pick 18. Pick 19. Let's go with another tackle right here. We're going to go with Troy Fautanu here out of Washington. For the Rams, they need to get another tackle, right? They wanted Joe Noteboom to kind of be that guy, and they signed him to a massive contract extension. It hasn't really worked out. So you definitely need to get in there and get yourself a legit tackle, right? I think they've kind of done a great job at getting that interior offensive line together, especially with the signing of Kevin Dotson this past offseason, one of the best offensive linemen in the entire league. But Troy Fautanu does have guard flexibility, but I would like to see him play tackle. I think he has a very good profile for the tackle position, right? 6'4", 317 pounds. I like him. If you want to take a look at him statistically, right here, 18 hurries. You definitely want to see that number go down, but only allowed 2 sacks on the entire season and primarily played left tackle. So I like Troy Fautanu, and that's the pick here for the Los Angeles Rams. Now, another team that desperately needs a tackle. Now, we take a look at the tackles on the board. I just don't know if any of these guys are going to go in the middle of the first round. Like, some of these guys are late first round guys, so maybe Pittsburgh trades back in this scenario. I just don't see it here, and maybe you can talk about Amarius Mims, who's ranked really high on this board. To be honest, I don't really care about the average draft position or the rank of this board. But Amarius Mims, this is a guy who has been hurt throughout, the past 2 seasons, and it's been multiple injuries that has caused him to miss time. And so I just think because of the injury bug that this guy has, he's not going to go in the first round. That's just what my gut is telling me. And, despite having a need at offensive line and wanting to replace Dan Moore and yada, 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 I just don't think it's happening. So what we're going to do here is go with another position of need. We're going to go with the cornerback position here. Again, there's going to be so many corners that go into this first round. Again, like I said, similar to the 2023 draft, but again, a very talented class nonetheless. We're going to go with Kamari Lassiter here out of Georgia. Now, Kamari Lassiter, okay, if this was a big board, or a mock draft based on my big board, this would have been the first corner off the board. Kamari Lassiter is my favorite corner in this entire draft class. I think that he plays the best man-to-man coverage. I think he provides the most upside, most athleticism, and he plays with energy that you can really feel. Like, it is going to energize a defense. He's not going to be one of those guys who is obnoxious and is going to get penalties and set your team back. Like, this guy's going to bring the energy, and it's one of those positions at cornerback where you're playing it, you got to play with confidence. You got to think that you are the best player on the football field, and Kamari Lassiter plays with that kind of intensity, with that kind of confidence. I absolutely love this player. I mean, you partner him up with Joey Porter Jr., who put together a very good rookie campaign. I mean, it's going to be a lockdown secondary. Seriously. Kamari Lassiter, I think, is one of those guys that is kind of going under the radar, and I kind of hope he continues to, just so that this could be like my sneaky pick where I'm like, hey, I told y'all so before the draft started. But for any Steelers fans that might be a little bit on the fence or think I'm suspect for, taking a guy like this, I mean, I love Kamari Lassiter. This is my number one cornerback in the draft. I am no scout expert by any means, but, I watch football and I can see a good football player, and this is one in Kamari Lassiter. Now, we move on to the Miami Dolphins. Let's go ahead here and take the first interior offensive lineman, Jackson Powers Johnson. Tremendous offensive lineman. I mean, you take a look at his grades. I mean, he is fantastic. He allowed one hurry this past season. And I understand that Oregon gets out the ball super quick, but what you love in his game, right, if you can find some video on him, does a great job of pulling along the line, getting to the second level, hitting multiple defenders on one play, right? I mean, he sees a defender in his face, and he's going to go after him and take him out of the play, right? I mean, and you're probably thinking in your head, that's what all offensive linemen are supposed to do. They don't all do that. Okay, they don't all do that. I mean, Jackson Powers Johnson goes above and beyond, makes block after block, hits anyone in his sight, and just has great agility. I think has a great anchor as well. And Miami, I think, is in real contention for a center just because they have a lot of free agents coming up. Connor Williams, who put together a very good season for them at center, got a leg injury. I believe it was an ACL or an Achilles. And so for that reason, I just don't think they're going to bring him back. And then they're going to try and target a guy like Jackson Powers Johnson to address that situation where they're going to have to fill in some of those missing spots on the roster throughout the draft. And I think center is one of those positions. Now we move on here to 22. The Philadelphia Eagles, I think, desperately need some cornerback help. You do have a couple of young guys on the roster, but for the most part, a lot of your guys, your key contributors like Darius Slay and James Bradbury, they're getting old. And so you need to replace them with some youth. Taking a look at that cornerback spot, all right? I mean, it's getting really depleted, but we're going to go with Cooper DeJean here. Now, to be honest, in my opinion, Cooper DeJean is one of those players that I think is being extremely overrated. I don't think he should go in the top half of the first round. I don't even think he's a first-round talent, in my opinion. I just don't think that he is going to be able to keep up in man-to-man coverage like some people are anticipating. Now, don't get me wrong. His man-to-man coverage, when you watch, is pretty solid at Iowa. However, I just think I don't think you can trust him to keep up with every team's number one receiver. Like, the NFL is a different breed, and I just don't really trust Cooper DeJean in that aspect. But if you go into a defense that plays a lot of zone coverage, or you potentially want to move him to safety, like, I think that's where he's going to excel the most. I could be very wrong on Cooper DeJean, but I mean, for what it is right now, not a huge fan of the guy from Iowa. Now, we move on here to 23. This was a very interesting pick for me for the Houston Texans because I did want to address some other positions, but it just wasn't really working out. And so we're going to go with the best player available on the board. We're going to go with Jerzon Newton. Now, this could make sense because Sheldon Rankins is going to be a free agent this year, who is one of your D tackles. You replace him with a guy like Jerzon Newton, and if he falls, this much in the draft, I mean, you go ahead and take him. I think Jerzon Newton might go a lot higher than this, and maybe I'm not valuing the player enough. But the reason why I did have him falling as far as he did is because of the fact that he is slightly undersized for an interior defensive lineman, right? 295. I know it's not severely undersized, but for a guy that you have wanting to play the interior, you would like to see him have an extra maybe 10 to 15 pounds on him, but nonetheless is the best pure pass rusher from the interior in this entire class. And I think also does a great job in the run game as well, right? I mean, just super disruptive, and just tears apart offensive linemen in the middle. I mean, you can get a guy who creates pressure up the middle, right? And if you want to have a comparison to a guy like that in last year's class, you can talk about Kalijah Kancey, right? And how much hype he was getting. You know, Jer'Zhan Newton, if he puts together a good combine, you're going to definitely see his draft stock go up as well. But for a team that has a lot of departing free agents in terms of edge rushers and interior defensive linemen, I think it's going to be important to address that need, especially with how important it is in a DeMeco Ryans defense. So we will go with Jer'Zhan Newton here at 23. 24, a lot of options you can go with here, but maybe this will surprise some people. We're going to go wide receiver here, and I'm going to go with Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. Now, we have to remember now, like, a couple of years ago, CeeDee Lamb was taken, and people were surprised, like, oh my God, like the Cowboys took a wide receiver. I think that this could seriously be a spot again where they take a wide receiver. I mean, just taking a look at what the board looks like, you could potentially go with a tackle here in this situation. I totally understand that. But Brian Thomas Jr. is a very, very good wide receiver. He had 17 touchdowns last year. And, you know, we talked about Rome Odunze being a huge deep threat. I mean, this guy, he runs great routes too and is just as effective as a deep ball receiver. He was the number 2 receiver in terms of deep yards, as you can see right here in college football. And again, like I said, 17 touchdowns. Like, Brian Thomas Jr. is a serious threat. Now, again, there are going to be some questions about him and how he can play in the intermediate and the short game just because he is so much of a deep threat. But man, you pair this guy up with CeeDee Lamb. I mean, if the offense wasn't already good, my goodness. I mean, you're going to have these two. You're going to have Brandon Cooks. You're going to have Michael Gallup. Like, I think this team is going to prepare to, you know, really load up in that wide receiver room, similar to how we saw them do it when they drafted CeeDee Lamb by surprise a couple of years ago. So I would not rule out wide receiver. As desperately as this team does need some other spots, I think this is the best player on the board right now, and so they go in that direction. Now, this is a team that is going to go defense every single time. Do not try and mock them at a different position, especially on the offensive side of the ball. It doesn't happen. And, you know, Jordan Love was the one exception. I mean, and that's the one exception they really only make is that quarterback spot. We're going to go with not a quarter, but a cornerback. We're going to go with TJ Tampa here out of Iowa State. Again, if you guys are one of those people who are going to get upset because of what the board ranking looks like PFF is, I mean, they don't get it right all the time. I mean, no one does, you know? And if it's going to be like, oh, you're giving us a second round player, yada, yada. Like, TJ Tampa could seriously go in the first round. I mean, this is a very consistent tackler, right, out of Iowa State. And I love that in a corner that's willing to go up and make those tackles. TJ Tampa is one of those guys. I think he also plays very good in man coverage. He does a great job of undercutting routes as well. And this team really needs a cornerback, right? I mean, we talk about Eric Stokes. You also have guys like Keyshawn Nixon who are potentially going to leave in free agency. I think they're going to look to address that secondary, whether it's the cornerback or the safety position. However, I do feel more confident that it will be the cornerback spot just because I haven't seen a ton of hype around the safety position, despite me having some first round grades on a couple of guys in this class. I haven't heard a ton of buzz about a safety going in the first round, and so I just don't think it's going to happen. Now, Tampa Bay, this is a team that has a lot of needs as well. They put together a really good season. Baker had a breakout year. I highly anticipate him to return to Tampa Bay, even with Dave Canales leaving. But what we're going to do here is we're going to take a wide receiver. We're going to go ahead and take Keon Coleman. Now, similar build to a Mike Evans, and you know that's the big thing. I don't know what's going to happen with Mike Evans, but you know, if he leaves, I mean, it's Chris Godwin and no one else, really. I mean, that's the truth. You might have some names and you can get technical with me, but I mean, when it comes down to it, you don't really have anyone after that. And so you want to make sure that there's some weapons there. This is a very athletic receiver for his size, right? 6'4", 215. But I think is a really solid route runner. He really disappeared in the second half of the season. We can take a look at that right now, right? 658 yards, and you can take a look at his grades as they slowly went down. I'm not sure what the reason for that is, but this dude can return punts as well. Is one of the better jump ball receivers in this entire class, and he can beat you after the catch as well with his athleticism. So Keon Coleman, I mean, it wouldn't shock me if he went higher in the draft. It wouldn't shock me if he went in the second round. It's kind of hard to project where he's going to go right now, but I think when you pair up the size and the athleticism with Keon Coleman, I mean, I thought this guy was fantastic from week one when they played LSU, and I just think the talent didn't disappear. They just weren't utilizing him. I like Keon Coleman here. 27 here for the Arizona Cardinals. This is another spot. Just take whoever you feel like is one of the better players available. We're going to go here with Ennis Rakestraw Jr. out of Missouri. This guy plays with a ton of energy too. We were talking about Kamari Lassiter. Ennis Rakestraw is another one of those guys, and this guy is willing to crash down the field and go ahead and make some tackles. Very lanky cornerback out of Missouri, but this is a team in Arizona who doesn't have anything at the cornerback position. I mean, it is about as depleted as it gets in the entire league. They have to go out and address that cornerback spot, and so that's what they do here with Ennis Rakestraw. Moving on here to 28. We're going to go wide receiver here. Gabe Davis is about to be a free agent. I think Khalil Shakir has really stepped up in his opportunities, and a lot of people are talking about Stephon Diggs and how he didn't really play well in the second half of the season. Diggs is still a high caliber receiver nonetheless. I don't know if the same will be able to be said as next season goes on, but Troy Franklin I think would be a huge addition. This is another guy who tends to get into the end zone quite a bit and has like 4.3, possibly, low 4.2 speed. Mismatch of a player. He's hard to catch in the open field, and I think does a really good job of creating separation at the top of his routes. Troy Franklin, I don't think is going to be a mid or a early first round pick, but I could definitely see him sneaking to the second round for a team that desperately is looking for some wide receiver help. Now, 29, Detroit Lions. Let's go with Braylon Trice here out of Washington. Kind of funny how it works out sometimes, because it's like we had Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Washington outside linebacker, go late in the first round in his draft. You're probably like, what the hell is this guy talking about? Anyway, it's just cool to see those parallels when you have guys that play the same position at the same school going to similar spots. Yada, yada, yada. Anyway, Detroit Lions take Braylon Trice here. They really need, I think, another edge presence. I know fans from Detroit are going to talk about a guy like James Houston and stuff. And Houston didn't really play this year because of injury, but I think you really need to get another guy in there. And just the way that the board is looking as well, I mean, I wanted to try and find a cornerback for this team, potentially an interior offensive lineman because of free agents that they're going to have this offseason. But again, I think this is a position of need. I've been saying that since last offseason. I'm going to address it here again with Braylon Trice. And again, I mean, this guy just has to be the sidekick, at the very least, the sidekick to Aiden Hutchinson. That sounds like a good deal to me. Now here for the number 30 overall pick here with the Baltimore Ravens, let's go ahead here and give them a wide receiver. Odell Beckham's going to be a free agent after this year. I mean, Rashad Bateman, I think, improved, but I don't think he's going to, be that guy that they probably anticipated him being when they took him in the first round a couple years ago. Let's go with Adonai Mitchell here. I mean, for whatever reason, they decided to pass the ball a whole lot in the AFC Championship. So you want a guy who's going to get open, score touchdowns, show up in the big games. Let's go with Adonai Mitchell right here out of Texas. Very lanky receiver here out of Texas. Originally committed to Georgia and then went to Texas. You might hear him referred to as AD Mitchell. 6'4", nearly 200 pounds. And then he's got 11 touchdowns, right? So, I mean, the production is not super high in terms of the yards and stuff, but I think that this is a very good route runner. I think this is a guy who can really high point the football. And again, I mean, you need a guy to shine in the brightest of moments. I think Adonai Mitchell is going to certainly be one of those guys in the league. Now, here at 31, here for the NFC champion, San Francisco 49ers. This is another team I think that could definitely use some cornerback help. But again, it's gotten to a point where so many corners are off the board. I just don't think any of these guys are really going to go in the first round anymore. So we're going to go with the tackle here. And, we talked about this earlier on in the video where I don't think that a tackle is going to go until the late first round. That was certainly foreshadowing. I think that this is a more respectable spot for these guys to be going in the draft. And so what we're going to go ahead and do here is we're going to take Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma. He got a lot of buzz after the Senior Bowl down in Alabama as well. But, I mean, this is like the Colton McKivitz replacement. I mean, McKivitz, I was very, very hesitant on him starting earlier this season, and they really just didn't have any other options. But he didn't really play that well either. I mean, he's not like the worst tackle in the league, but it was obvious that there was certainly room for improvement at that position. So we're going to go with Tyler Guyton here at offensive tackle out of Oklahoma, and we're going to cap this thing off with another offensive lineman, Jawaan Taylor. He holds too much. Nick Bosa, he wasn't wrong about that. Like, I mean, he does hold a lot, and Donovan Smith didn't look good either. So you're going to have to look to replace those tackles. We're going to go here with Jordan Morgan out of Arizona to cap off Mock Draft 1.0 here for the 2024 NFL Draft. Let me know what you guys think about this mock draft in the comment section below. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and most importantly, don't forget to subscribe. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers. But until then, we will see you guys all later. Peace.